Hey friends, before we dive in, say hi in the comments. Tell me what time it is where you are and which region you're watching from. I'm in the United Kingdom and I publish this show every single night right at midnight. If you genuinely enjoy these deep dives, tap subscribe, but only if it earns it. You wake to the sound of iron rims biting stone. Not a clock, not a chirp of electronics, just cartwheels grinding through the same grooves cut by 1,000 market mornings. The light is young and angled low. It slips past painted facades and catches mosaics underfoot so that the floor seems to sparkle with a counterfeit sea. We think of Pompeii as a ruin, but this city is not dead yet. And you are in it, a breathing lattice of trade, ambition, gossip, and gods. Later, the mountain will steal every heartbeat it can reach. But for now, the city is a promise, not a tomb. Breathe and you'll taste the day. Olive smoke from breakfast hearths, the dark, tangy perfume of garum, that fermented fish sauce the town makes by the amphora, the dust shaken off tunics, cloaks, and plans. Somewhere to your left, a slave boy works a hand bell, advertising figs so ripe they're surrendering under their own sugar. From the corner, a dog barks at nothing and then at everything in the manner of dogs across epochs. And above all of it, the crisp cut of sandals, step, 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 200 transactions walking toward their price. Your lodging depends on your life. If you're lucky, you wake in a domus, a private house that brags in public. The doorway rises tall, the lintel thick with paint. Someone has invested in good red. The threshold mosaic has opinions. Cave canem, beware of the dog. Though the resident hound is an elderly lump who considers all burglars personal friends. Inside, the atrium opens, a bright geometry of water and sky. There is an impluvium, a shallow pool that catches the rain in clean angles. If the household is pious, and almost all households are pious, a lararium glows in a side niche. Clay lares forever frozen with their arms upraised, guardians of thresholds and soup pots and birth beds and whispers. If you are less fortunate, you wake in an insula, a tenement that leans on other buildings like a tired companion. Your ceiling is a guess. Your wall is someone else's wall. The neighbors cook garlic before sunrise and retell arguments after midnight. In the courtyard, a woman with strong arms draws water from a cistern and settles a baby on one hip as if that hip were a shelf. There's mold in the corners. There's laughter too. Whichever roof you pay for, the sky is free and very blue. Clothes first. Roman fashion is a simple technology that solves 3 problems at once: decency, climate, and status. Nearly everyone begins in a tunica. For men, 2 rectangles joined and belted. For women, a longer fall of linen or wool. Wealth adds layers as easily as money adds weight to a purse. Women who can afford it drape a stola and fasten it with brooches, the metal cool on morning skin. Then a palla, a shawl to anchor modesty and mark intention. Men with business in the forum tug at the folds of their toga, a white argument draped over one shoulder that says, "I am a citizen, and today I expect to be listened to." Everyone everywhere argues with fabric. Breakfast is a negotiation between appetite and schedule. You soak yesterday's bread in watered wine to bruise it soft, or you dip it in oil that tastes of pepper and green stone. A pickled olive slides strange and bracing across the tongue, small thunder for the mouth. If you're heading to the fields, you eat standing because the sun does not take a vote. If you're staying in town, you eat slowly and pretend not to notice the neighbor's slave girl watching you from the doorway, counting how many bites you take for reasons that are not yours to know. Then you step into the street and the city tightens around you like a belt. Pompeii is a working animal built from rooms. The Via dell'Abbondanza runs long like a spine, and from its spring side streets, quieter capillaries that carry the neighborhood's blood. Shop fronts open directly onto the pavement, tabernae where everything is retail and nothing is private. A fuller's workshop, Fullonica, breathes its sour fumes into the morning. He makes cloth clean by soaking it in ammonia, which is a polite way of saying urine, which is a polite way of saying the city launders its tunics in the city's own body. In the back room, men stomp cloth underfoot in vats, a choreography of knees and curses. Next door, a thermopolium invites you with embedded jars in a stone counter, dolia sunk like moons. Steam lifts from lentil stew. A boy ladles it into bowls and counts change with a thumb slick from broth. He calls everyone domin, master, and almost means it. Across the street, a baker, pistor, opens his oven, and a human weather of heat rolls out, bright and violent. The pistrinum's millstones look like squat volcanoes with waistlines. A blindfolded mule circling flour from stone. Later, an inspector will check the bread's weight against law. For now, the baker presses his seal into each round, proof against fraud and theft and forgetfulness. Scribes set up in the shade with wax tablets to rent. Letters are more affordable than literacy. A barber snaps his fingers for a customer, and hair hisses under the blade like grass. In the corner, two men play Alia, a dice game, and lose more than coin. Time, temper, and the right to tell their wives the truth. A woman with a precise mouth appraises wine through a sieve. She is buying for a tavern that keeps its quiet and its knives. In an alley, a wall declares, Secundus loves Iris. Another wall answers, Iris loves whoever brings better earrings. Pompeii is a chorus, and the refrain is always now. The city's faith is made of 1,000 small obediences. You touch the lararium with 2 fingers and then your lips, the gesture as swift as a swallow's wing. On the way to the forum, you pass the temple of Apollo, its columns a rippling forest of stone, and you hear the priest, assistant, beat a rhythm on a bronze instrument to call attention to sacrifice. You do not stop. You have contracts to witness and a quarrel to misplace, but you turn your palm a fraction outward, a micro-prayer, in case the god is hunting for courtesy. If business is your occupation, the forum is your altar. Here, law is oxygen, and rumor is weather. Today, a magistrate, Doomveer, will preside over a dispute about a wall that migrated 6 inches during the night. No one mentions the bribe that greased the wall's feet. Everyone mentions precedent. Slaves ferry tablets back and forth between benches where patrons receive their clientes, the morning ritual of salutatio, a little theatre of dependence where favors are coins and faces are purses. A money changer licks one to test it, as if metal had a flavor. A man in a good toga strides past, trailed by 2 friends and an argument. He's running for office, and therefore running for his life, because politics is the sport that kills slowly. He has paid someone to write his name in red paint across 3 streets, and someone else to write his rival's name in a darker context on the wall behind the latrines. Perhaps he believes he serves the res publica. Perhaps he serves only the version of himself that lives in his own story. He is a Roman. The difference is academic. By late morning, the baths are on everyone's horizon, even if their feet are not. The Stabian baths breathe heat like a creature. Men argue about grain prices with an earnestness they cannot muster for their wives' poetry. A contractor boasts he can place a new tiled floor in 2 days. His rival murmurs that speed is a species of theft. In the tepidarium, the warm room, you lean against stucco that holds warmed air within its hollow walls. In the caldarium, the hot room, sweat learns your name. You scrape oil from your skin with a strigil, and on its curved edge you see the smallest self-portrait the ancient world can offer. Your face, reduced to a shining smear, about to be wiped away. You could stay. You could sink into the water and pretend the world beyond the bath, as mosaic border cannot reach you with its fingers full of obligation. But a slave lifts the curtain and calls your name for the 3rd time, and you remember the auction that begins at midday, and the carpenter who demands payment, and the plasterer who swears with all the gods as witnesses that he will finish the dining room fresco before your daughter's betrothal feast. He will not. Step out. The sun is a white coin overhead. If you are a woman with means, your house is not just a dress, but instrument. In the peristyle garden, you inspect the laurel that insists on dying, no matter how many prayers you push into its soil. Indoors, you negotiate dowry with a man who thinks your silence equals consent. You prove him wrong using quiet words that stack like stones, precise, load-bearing, necessary. When he leaves, you pay the mosaicist for the myth scene that is climbing across your triclinium floor. Ariadne asleep on Naxos just before rescue. Your husband wanted Hercules in his moment of victory. You ordered a woman at the hinge of her fate. If you are poor, you invent your city from scraps. You mix lime with goat hair for makeshift mortar. You rent space from a landlord who promises to fix the roof before winter. Winter will hear the promise and smile. You make stew from bones and pride it into flavor with coriander and thyme. You spread a wet tunic over a rope and turn it once, twice, the twist wringing water and complaint from the cloth. You laugh with your neighbor because to laugh is a cheap luxury and a good one. At noon, the mountain looks like a good mood. Beyond the walls, the vineyards dress the land in careful lines. Vines creep over arbors, live stakes of poplar or maple, and rise into a green geometry that trains sunlight into sugars. The Villae Rusticae stow harvest in their handsome bellies, oil, wine, olives swimming in their own story. Along the coast at Herculaneum, wealth lounges harder. Houses wider, mosaics prouder, views an act of theft from the horizon. In Stabiae, luxury is a verb. In Oplontis, somebody's second life pretends to be the first. Everywhere, people draw straight lines through crooked luck. Buy this, sell that, marry here, borrow there, die later. The mountain is part of the arithmetic. It is a backdrop you no longer see, like your own pulse. The locals call it Vesuvius, and the poets call it a garden. Vines cling high, and on its shoulder is a notch where shepherds swear they can hear secrets when the wind comes from the sea. Sometimes the ground whispers. The wells complain. A dog whines to nobody you can see, but the amphorae are full, the contracts are binding, the gods are satisfied with their share of smoke. What else is a city supposed to want? Toward the middle of the afternoon, the light acquires a thickness, not dark, never dark, but crowded, as if the air has learned a new language and is trying it out. You have felt this before, and it was only weather. You tell yourself it is weather now. You send a boy to fetch fresh water because the cistern near the market has a taste you can name, and because a chore is the best leash for worry. A traveling poet on a street corner recites something flattering about Venus and the town that honors her. He ends with a line about immortality that sounds ridiculous in every age and therefore earns coins in all of them. A matron tears bread for stray dogs with a hand that has never lifted a bucket, and the dogs accept the charity with the perfect trust of creatures who do not know the concept of tomorrow. In an upper-story window, a girl practicing her letters traces A and B in wax, and then draws a fish so elegant her mother will keep the tablet long past the day it hardens and cracks. Up the street, a wall poster announces a gladiatorial exhibition rescheduled from last month's brawl. Names painted large, lesser men painted smaller. If the editor of the games paid for the ink, the paint is thick and expensive. If he did not, the red bleaches in the sun like a lie that knows it is a lie. You know this. You know all of this. It is the grammar of living, and you speak it without thinking. There is nothing curious about a sky that only seems closer. There is nothing to read in the way the sparrows lift away from the eaves and do not return. There is nothing to fear in a line of cloud above the mountain that is more column than cloud, and yet your mouth has gone dry enough to drink. You turn, because we always turn toward the thing that might be a story, and find yourself looking directly at the absence where the mountain's top should be. On most days, the peak makes a soldier's profile against the sky. Today, that profile wears a new hat, flat, broad, and climbing. The column that rises from Vesuvius is not smoke like from hearths. It is a body made of particles fine as breath and hot as a sentence that cannot be unsaid. It grows, then grows faster, then becomes the scale by which you will measure every other large thing for the rest of your life. Someone near you says, "What a fire," in the tone men use when a neighbor's house is burning and the flames are handsome. Someone else, older, says nothing and takes 2 steps backward, as if distance were a tool you could pull from your belt. A third person laughs, out of nerves, out of disbelief, out of the small human astonishment that real events sometimes look exactly like the stories we invent to frighten children into obedience. It is not yet ash, not yet. It is only afternoon, and the market still hums, and a mule thinks the column is a cloud and flicks its ears accordingly. A woman lifts her jar and balances it against her hip with that practiced curve, the choreography of utility, and decides not to go to the fountain until the line shortens, because what is the hurry? Because why spend a quarter hour in public when she could spend it alone with her own thoughts? She will think of this decision later, if there is a later, and assign it meaning. For now it is habit, and habit is how a city breathes without getting winded. Let the record say the city was beautiful before it broke. Let it say that doors stood open not from carelessness but from confidence, that street stones held a shine where feet had polished them, that the baker's boy tucked an extra roll into a widow's sleeve and pretended it fell there by accident, that a potter, shaping a bowl, glanced up at the mountain, squinted, and then decided to keep the rim thin because elegant things are worth the risk. Let it say that people planned and loved and argued and erred and invested and gave alms and told the same jokes twice and named their dogs after gods and their gods after weather. Let it say that nobody here imagined themselves a fossil. In the evening, the light softens and the column hardens and the first grains begin to fall, no heavier than an idea. You brush one from your forearm and see a print as white as flour. Somewhere far down the Via Stabiana, a child opens his mouth to taste it and declares with authority that it is dry snow. His mother laughs and the sound is ordinary and good. She will tell him not to lick the next one because mothers are a civilization's first engineers and their warnings are the bridges we build over dumbness. Night has not yet arrived, but you can feel it rehearsing. You light a lamp early because lamps make courage smell like olive oil. You tell the household to bring the laundry in, to shutter the windows, to move the amphorae under cover because falling grit finds every crack and turns to paste. You choose not to visit the neighbor who quarrels with his wife because tonight the column will be the towness only argument. You stand in the doorway longer than the weather warrants, watching as the sky teaches itself a darker grammar. Before bed, before anything, you place a pinch of incense in the lararium dish and ask the small painted household gods to stay awake. You are not a superstitious person, merely a Roman, and the difference is one of vocabulary. The flame catches with that little sweet crackle that has consoled human beings since the first human learned to gather heat with patience. You look past the altar to the impluvium, to the square of sky the house holds like a mouthful of blue, and the square is no longer blue. Across the city, someone writes 4 words on a wall: "Do not waste daylight." The joke is that daylight is already wasting. The prayer is that it returns. Sleep does not come the way it usually does on sandals of felt. It comes as negotiation. You lie very still and insist to your own body that there is nothing here that can reach the bed with teeth. Outside, the street empties, then fills, then empties. The beginning of the small migration that separates the careful from the curious. An old man ties a cloth over his nose and sits on the stoop with a cup of wine because the world has taught him that everything is easier if you pretend to watch it happen from very close up. A girl climbs to the roof against strict instructions and watches the column fork at the top. then weld itself together again, as if the sky were a blacksmith shaping catastrophe into form. Before your eyes close, you do what every person in every age does the night before their town becomes a story. You promise yourself you will leave in the morning. You will, if morning comes the way it used to. You wake to grit in your teeth and the sound of your roof learning a new language. It is not rain, because rain is soft and democratic. This is private and precise. Each grain strikes with a tiny certainty. Tick, 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 until the ticks pile into a hiss, and the hiss becomes weather, and the weather becomes a thought you cannot chase out of the room. Leave. The atrium is a geometry of grey. The impluvium is an unexpected bowl of stone flour, not water. What was open air last night is now a shaft into a dimmer world, and the square of sky you once kept like a pet has grown sullen and metallic. You taste the ash when you lift your head from the pallet. It creaks between molars, a primitive sand. You spit and the floor drinks it like news. Everyone talks at once. It's a Roman house, so this is neither novel nor helpful. Your wife wants the dowry chest, your son wants the dog, your neighbor wants your ladder. The slave girl wants permission to be afraid out loud, and you give it to her because you are not a monster and because someone should be honest. The old aunt in the corner wants her amulets, all of them, especially the one against choking because irony is not sacred to gods. You move through rooms you know by heart and find them rearranged by powder. A fresco of Apollo has developed a cough. His cheek is dusted, his lyre a silhouette. The lararium flickers bravely. Ash sifts down in spirals that look like tiny galaxies collapsing. You pinch incense into the dish and murmur that you are on your way, that you will take the household out by Porta Nocera or Porta Marina, whichever offers passage to a road that is still a road. You do not say, if. Romans are allergic to if. Outside, the street is a river of pumice that flows without water. It has depth, slick and deceptive, ankle, calf, knee, depending on where the wind has been ambitious. Roof tiles clatter down with the hasty politeness of a shopkeeper who has realized too late that the shelf was never meant for jars this heavy. Somewhere, a mule screams the way only mules can, the sound of stubborn intelligence understanding its odds. You tie cloth across your mouth because the ash wants your lungs more than it wants your floors. You wrap the youngest in a cloak and fetch the household gods in a bundle, because the first thing humans carry from burning houses is always the story of themselves. The dowry chest is heavier than love. You lift one end and feel your spine argue, so you drop it and call it a donation to future archaeologists, a phrase you do not yet know, but mean with every surrendered coin. The neighbors appear, turning the street into a caravan. The baker seals his oven with an instinct he doesn't question, entrusting tomorrow's bread to today's disaster. A fuller slaps his door lintel twice for luck, forgetting that luck cannot be summoned with the same gesture you use to quiet a disobedient mule. A child has made a game of stepping only on the black paving stones, and his sister scolds him because games do not belong in catastrophes, and he scolds her back because catastrophes are exactly where games belong. The ashfall thickens the way a lie thickens, slowly and then suddenly. Pumice begins now, grey-white, light enough to float on water and heavy enough to break a skull when dropped from a height the mountain considers insignificant. It arrives at angles, clicks against shutters, taps shoulders, stings cheeks. People begin to wear their cloaks over their heads, not because the cloth helps, but because hiding has always improved morale. At a corner, you pass a thermopolium still open. The owner, whose name is not inscribed anywhere history will keep, ladles stew with a rhythm that resists panic. He has covered the embedded amphorae in his counter with lids, as if hygiene matters, and perhaps it does. He hands bowls to men who swear they have no appetite and then eat as if their jaws were small machines built to deny fear. He refuses coin from a woman with a baby. The woman pretends not to notice the refusal because the exchange of pride is a delicate art. The forum is fog. Statues emerge from it like reluctant gods. The bronze of the emperor wears a powdered wig of ash that somehow makes him more honest. A magistrate stands on the steps and shouts about order and calm until his voice performs a small suicide. He finally does the only useful thing. He points in 3 directions that are not the mountain and tells everyone to choose one. Leadership is sometimes just that, an authoritative gesture away from the worst idea in the room. You pick Porta Nocera because it leads inland where the road is good and the vineyards are not yet a rumor. The procession forms itself without a vote. Those on foot at the front, carts next, the stubborn wealthy bringing up the rear with strong slaves buckling under furniture that will later become excellent firewood for someone else's camp. A woman carries 2 cages of birds. The birds are quiet, tiny prophets announcing bad air. A boy drags a small amphora that once held garum and now holds his father's tools. It leaves a thin trench in the ash, a child's version of history. At intervals, the ground shakes. Not the theatrical heave of stories, but a deep shrug, like a large animal trying to dislodge something from its back. Each tremor sends a ripple along the line. Feet shuffle, shoulders square, eyes widen, then narrow. The ash above you responds like applause withheld. Behind, the mountain roars in syllables too long for human throats. The first roof gives up in your hearing. It collapses not like a drum, but like a sentence that runs out of patience. Crack, sigh, thud, and the sigh is dust. And the dust is a small night. The men nearest the sound do what men do. They run toward it. There are hands to pull from the powder after all, and debts the living owe the almost dead. You go too, because character is a muscle that acts before consultation. You find a boy pinned by a beam that looks like a weapon designed by trees. 6 of you raise it and become briefly a machine built for lifting. The boy comes free with a scream that cauterizes something in your head. His mother thanks Jupiter. You feel a sudden treasonous gratitude to the carpenter whose old nails held the rest of the roof a moment longer than they should have. You move on, because moving on is what the living do to honor the exhausted exertions of luck. At Porta Nocera, the gate is half-choked. Ash has remade the street into dunes that change underfoot. A soldier with ash in his eyelashes raises his hand for silence and then coughs instead. His discipline is evident in the way he apologizes to nobody. He urges people to file in order, which they do for 3 heartbeats and then do not. The crowd appends a second lane, then a third, and the geometry of panic replaces the geometry of stone. Still, the city exhales through its own teeth and survives the choking. Outside the walls, the landscape is a forgetful chalk drawing. Vines bend under load. The sky is a ceiling with bad plaster. Somewhere, faint and wrong, you hear waves beating themselves flatter than waves should be. People talk less now. Breath has become an economy and words are expensive. The ash finds eyes even behind cloth, even behind lids. Tears make paste. You walk as if the ash were a question and your feet the answer. Along the way you pass a shrine, a humble square with a painted snake twined along its base. Someone, it must have been this morning or last lifetime, left a honey cake on the ledge. It is now a sugar-gray dome. A child reaches for it because children always test the boundaries of the sacred. His father catches the wrist and shakes his head with a tenderness so practiced it might be religion. The child stares at the cake as if it contains the edible geometry of safety. The wind shifts. It is a small sentence with fatal grammar. The column leans toward you like a teacher about to correct. The ash thickens into clumps. Pumice grows bolder. Rocks learning to fly. You pull your cloak tighter and consider the mathematics of going back. The city, at least, has roofs, and some of those roofs will hold. But the gate behind you has become a mouth that is swallowing names, and your feet have begun to believe in forward the way zealots believe in prophecy. A woman near you stumbles and goes down to both knees, and the way she cradles her belly tells you what she carries. You reach for her without deciding to, and the man at your elbow reaches too, and suddenly she is up again, surprised by the sudden adequacy of strangers. She thanks God you do not share, and you nod because the ash has made everyone ecumenical. You pass a vineyard where the grapes hang dulled under powder. A farmer you half know, he looked older even yesterday, stands between two rows and considers his season. He's doing harvest math in catastrophe time, how many jars he could have filled, how many debts he could have shrunk, how many sons he could have kept home another year with another promise. He loves this land the way men love the version of themselves they become on it. He will not leave. You do not argue. The ash is an impatient mediator. At the crossroads, the crowd hesitates as if choice were a luxury and not the only thing left. One road aims to Nuceria, another to an idea of hills that seems suddenly naive. A trader in a good cloak points to the sea. Boats. And the group splits the way groups split, along lines of trust and rumor. The trader's faction peels towards Stabiae and the coast. You keep inland because the wind is writing reasons in your face, and because your legs, which are cowards, have become wise. The day dims, then brightens strangely, then dims again. The sun is still up there, an offended coin, but ash has taught it manners. The air has a taste that sits between vinegar and grief. The old aunt coughs a cough that seems to shake yesterday loose from her ribs. You slow down and put her arm over your shoulder, and she turns into a weight that is not unwanted. People have been leaning on you your entire life. It is almost a relief to do it literally. At some point the sky begins to throw lightning inside the column, a god's own ironwork. The bolts are greenish, sick-colored, the way copper burns, and the rumble is a constant petulance, as if the mountain disapproves of the arrangements of streets and intends to edit them personally. The child who tried to step only on black stones is wide-eyed now, receiving his first lesson in scale. He whispers, "Is it night?" And nobody answers, because even the correct answer would feel like an insult. You reach a farmhouse whose doorway is a square of darkness, and you negotiate shelter with ash in your mouth. The owner, who has already negotiated with 5 families and lost credit to all of them equally, nods you in with the hospitality that remains when blankets run out. Inside, the air is foul but still, which is a kind of mercy. The animals share it. 2 goats with ash in their eyelashes, a dog who has decided to attach himself to the first person who remembers his name, a hen who is realism in feathers. On the floor, strangers become furniture that breathes. You wet cloths, you pass them, you change them when they become mud. You trade sips of water like talismans. You tell the old aunt a story you have told her before, about a summer when the figs were so fat the branches begged for relief, and she smiles with the muscle memory of contentment. The child falls asleep mid-cough, and you hold him upright so his chest can remember its job. Outside, the ash continues with professional dedication. It presses on the roof in polite increments, like a bureaucrat adding paper to a stack. When the stack falls, it will be for reasons the paper invented. The farmer checks the rafters with a stick and makes the universal sound of men inspecting wood. He props one beam with a post, then another, turning the house into an argument of angles and hope. Hours become a new unit. You measure them by coughs, by the scrape of sandals when someone shifts position, by the muffled avalanches when another house collapses not far away, and the sound arrives as a rumor instead of an event. You doze and wake and cannot tell which is which. The dreamscape and the farmhouse share a color. When the door opens, night slams in like a fact. A man enters, chalk from hair to sandals. He has rope burns on both palms and the look of someone who has tried to save a roof with rope, because rope is what he had. He says the city is disappearing in layers, like a scribe scraping a tablet to write a new law over the old one. He says the amphitheater is a bowl of ash. He says a woman is giving birth in the street with 3 strangers for midwives and 1 for priest. He says more, and each sentence is a small stone that lands in the room and decides to stay. A girl at the back asks the question everyone has shelved. Will it stop? She's old enough to be lied to gently and young enough to resent it. The man with the rope Burns looks at his hands as if they might have an oracle in them. Everything stops, he says, and the answer is both comfort and doom. Toward what your body guesses is evening, the wind shifts again and the ash eases. The pause is not mercy, it is breath. You do what animals do in reprieve. You move. The farmhouse empties itself into the half-world, and the procession reforms, this time smaller, heavier with absence, lighter with decisions made. The old aunt insists on walking. You let her and remain at her elbow like a duty that has learned to love itself. The road rises and the city lowers into a grey that is almost kind. From here, Pompeii looks like a map being erased by a careful hand. The villas along the way are lumps with memories inside. In one, a mosaic survives under a dusting of ash. Dolphins riding waves that no longer exist. The art is too cheerful for the air, which makes it valuable in a new way. A man points, you all look. The column has changed shape. It is not a column now, but a stalk topped with a mushroom, a pine. Pliny will find the right metaphor later and be blamed for it for 2,000 years. The top spreads, collapses, falls, and the fall becomes a flow that moves faster than any human can. You will not meet that flow today. Others will, and they will leave no word for it but heat. But you feel its promise like a dog senses thunder. You walk. By what might be midnight, the ash begins to pack underfoot like snow that forgot water. Each step leaves a shallow print that fills as you lift your heel, as if the ground is actively uninterested in your biography. You are very tired, the kind of tired that presses the world narrow, the kind of tired where you promise anything to any god with an open ear and a small maintenance plan. You pass one last shrine, 2 small pillars and a ledge where someone has cleared a circle of ash and set a lamp. The flame shivers in a draught you cannot find. A scrap of wool lies folded near it with a neatness that feels ceremonial. You add a coin to the ledge because money is a language you speak even when you have nothing to say. The coin darkens immediately, ash finding the bright with an intimacy that feels personal. When dawn finally negotiates its way through the world, it is not the color of forgiveness. It is pewter and exhausted. You have made it beyond the worst of the fall for now, and the road ahead is ugly but plausible. You look back. The city is a bruise under the horizon, swelling. The mountain is a throat still clearing itself of centuries. You take inventory, not of property. Your property is a rumor, but of names. You speak them under your breath. The old aunt still beside you, the boy who sleeps while walking, the woman with the birds, who has one left and holds it like a thought, the neighbor who wanted your ladder and now walks with his hand on your shoulder as if you are the ladder, the dog who has adopted your group and believes he invented loyalty, the slave girl who keeps pace and, between coughs, sings a guttering lullaby she learned from a mother she cannot remember. You add your own name last, because you are Roman and therefore dramatic. Ahead somewhere is Nuceria or a camp or a villa that will take you in for bread price and news. Behind is ash that will harden into memory. You will say later that the worst part was the waiting, not the heat or the stone or the smell of bodies a day from being stories. But the hours when the mountain held you in suspense, each grain of ash a second falling onto your roof, your head, your life. You will say, the mountain taught patience cruelly. You will say, we learned. And you will say, because it is true, that the city did not die quickly. It died in paragraphs with commas. It left time for choices. It left time for kindnesses that made no sense on a ledger. It left time for a woman to hand her last bowl of stew to a stranger, for a man to prop a stranger's roof with his only beam. For a child to hand a bird to an older woman whose hands had forgotten the shape of gentle things. This is what the Ashfall preserved, under the plaster molds of terror. The human negotiations with disaster that never make inscriptions. The slow burials of habit, of pride, of routine, of generosity. The city's last long day was also its most ordinary, and that is what will break you when you walk its streets 2 millennia from now. A loaf still in an oven, a door barred from within, a dog's chain drawn taut toward an opening that never reopened. You walk, the ash thins, the air learns to be air again. Behind you, Pompeii turns into a tense held, so long it becomes a noun. The ash finally eases, and for a moment it feels like the mountain has lost interest. You step out from the farmhouse, and the world is a dim charcoal sketch. The road is no longer a road so much as a soft ramp of grey that yields like stale bread underfoot. Behind you, Pompeii is a smudged hill. Ahead, the sky is the colour of old pewter. You could almost mistake the pause for mercy, except that mercy does not taste of minerals and fear. The wind is wrong. In the afternoon, it drove the plume away from you. Now it backs and circles and returns, carrying a smell like hot stone. Far off, you hear a sound that doesn't match anything your memory can file, a low, continuous tearing, as if the sky is being unzipped. Someone says it's over. Someone else says it's beginning. You adjust the cloth across your mouth and herd your small procession farther up the rise, the old aunt, light as a bundle of sticks and stubborn as an ox. The neighbour who has attached his hand to your shoulder as if you are a post in a flood. The child who slept walking and now walks asleep. The slave girl who hums whenever she coughs, making a thin music that pretends to be courage. A stray dog scouts ahead, glancing back every few steps to confirm that it still owns you. Behind, the column loses shape. It sags at the waist, then bulges, then collapses inward, and suddenly the mountain is not a chimney but a mouth. The mouth exhales. You can't know the terms, not yet, but what it breathes is a pyroclastic surge, a ground-hugging cloud of gas, ash and shredded stone, blistering hot and fast in the way fast becomes when it divorces from human scale. It does not roll politely like fog. It runs, dragging thunder in its belly. It takes the line of least resistance, and then some, following gullies and streets and the logic of air made heavy. It smothers fire, and then invents a new kind of burning that uses your own breath against you. You see none of this in textbook cross-section. You feel it as a wind that is not wind, as if the night has decided to push you with hands. The first surge does not reach you. It pours toward the sea and spends itself on Herculaneum, where the shoreline is now a rumour and the boathouses are packed with people who bank their lives on water. Doors slam, bodies huddle, prayers collide. The surge arrives faster than bargains. Heat is its language, speed its grammar. Wood turns to carbon and grief to mineral. Later, much later, people will find the skeletons and give them names like family and friend and last embrace. For now, the only witness is the mountain and the waves that boil without boiling. You are inland, and luck, always prideful, claims you as an example. The ash that falls here is coarse again, not the flour that starved your breath all afternoon. You use the reprieve the way any animal uses it. You move. Each step writes a shallow story the next gust erases. Your mouth tastes of iron and old water. Your lungs do their arithmetic. Air in, fear out, again, again. Midnight happens, or what passes for it under a sky so full your eyes keep insisting it is afternoon in a forge. A green-lit bolt licks the base of the cloud and walks away muttering. The earth shivers like a horse throwing flies. Somewhere to your left, a roof fails with a noise like two sentences colliding. The second surge begins to form. Same birth, different childhood. The column feeds it, as a collapsing wall feeds a flood. It comes lower, thicker, companioned by an ashfall that has regained its ambition. You drag a cloak over the old aunt's head and she yanks it down to see, Because some people are built to look at the thing that is killing them until they understand its manners. The dog presses against your leg and makes himself smaller, a physics that cannot help him, but helps you. You pass a small shrine half swallowed by drifts. Someone, foolish or faithful, has kept a lamp alive in a niche. Its flame is absurd and therefore useful. You touch the ledge with 2 fingers and then your lips. You are not a devout person, merely an opportunist with a ritual vocabulary. On the far shore across the bay, a teenage boy watches with eyes that will teach his hand to write. He makes notes by lamplight while his mother tries to decide between reassurance and truth. His words will be the reason anyone centuries from now knows the phrase, "a pine tree on fire, its trunk a column." But you do not know he exists. Your history is presently busy being future archaeology. The surge that finally finds Pompeii comes just before dawn. It builds unseen, a beast assembling its weight in a valley you cannot see. When it crests the last low ridge toward the city, it is a slow white cliff that moves like a decision. Heat outruns it, an invisible scout. Doors that were barred become rehearsals. Inside houses, families who chose walls over road press themselves into corners and wait for something they could never have named. The city receives the wave, as cities always receive disaster, unevenly. Some streets channel it, turning airflow into a weapon. Others deflect it and buy their people 5 seconds, sometimes 10. In one house, a father crouches with his child under a bed, not because it will help, but because the space feels smaller, and small is friendlier. In another, a woman sits upright with her hands folded, the posture of someone who has decided to be dignified in all things. In a third, a slave holds the door against the wind, because keeping doors is what his life has taught his muscles to do. He keeps it until the door becomes a weather report lying on the floor. Heat does its arithmetic. Skin first, then the soft apparatus behind it. Airways collapse like frightened animals. The brain, that careful accountant, pays out consciousness and then stops keeping books. In some rooms, the wave drops ash and moves on, leaving people in attitudes of sleep that deceive no one. In others, it brings enough to bury, the weight a mercy for those who would have woken to a worse world. You will not see these rooms, not for 2,000 years, and when you do, you will fill them with plaster and guess at names. Farther inland where you are, the wind catches your cloak and tries to introduce you to the ground. The air turns from bad to impossible and back to bad again in cycles your body cannot predict. You shout, and your shout becomes gauze. You press the old aunt against the lee side of a stone wall and build a shape around her with your body and your coat. The dog finds the other side and completes the geometry. The slave girl hums louder now, the notes hopping like small birds between coughs. You think wildly of the mosaic in your dining room, the sea creatures that look like laughter, and for a needle point of seconds you are grief multiplied by tile. The surge passes. Not around you, not above you, through. It moves on with the indifference of weather and the efficiency of a trained army. In its wake, the night seems raw, as if stripped of a skin you didn't know it wore. Ash drifts down in a slower cadence. You try to stand, and your legs conduct a small mutiny, then forgive you when you promise them a future. You look back. The city below is a soft shape with hard memories inside. Above it, the plume is shorter now, choked by its own violence. Lightning still stitches its underside in ill colors. The rumble has settled into a familial background. You almost miss it when it pauses. There are more surges, lesser, angled, hungry in new directions. One slips along the coast and kneels on Stabiae, where people who ran toward ships now choose whichever god seems likely to share a boat. Another is born, climbs, collapses without reaching anything living, and teaches you the strange relief of witness without cost. You watch until watching becomes work. The old aunt asks for water. You pour the last of the flask into a cup and she sips and then says with dry humor, "You kept the good wine for Jupiter. You smile because the world needs your mouth to remember how. She dozes, then breathes in a stutter that frightens you and immediately rights itself. You place your palm on her ribs the way you have seen midwives do for newborns, as if steadiness could be taught by touch. By the time dawn negotiates entry, the light is the color of tin. It dislikes distance. Everything looks near and flattened, as if the day were pressing the world to a page. The ash underfoot has crusted. Each step breaks it with a muffled crackle that tells you there was heat here and is not now. Your lungs accommodate the morning the way a house accommodates new furniture, grudgingly, then permanently. You pick your way down a little to a rise that offers a franker view. Pompeii is a single, sullen mound with familiar angles softened into rumor. Roofs have become suggestions, streets, strategies. The amphitheater is a shallow bowl of grey, its drama retired. The temple columns poke through like broken ribs. Of the painted walls, only the sturdiest still pretend to carry stories. They will try for centuries, and strangers with brushes will help, and the colors will return like a rumor supported by evidence. You do not go closer. You cannot. The air over the town still snakes with warmth you can see. The wave paths are visible as lighter stripes laid across darker ash. Every instinct you own says later. Every instinct you own adds, if there is a later. Around you, other parties of survivors begin to detach from the roadside misery and attempt new histories. A pair of brothers fashion masks from wet cloth and talk about the vineyard as if a harvest might exist on the far side of this. A woman with a burned hand negotiates with a stranger for oil to dress it and pays in rings she cannot see clearly. She holds them out and lets him choose, a trust so reckless it becomes sacred. The dog leaves you and returns leading two children whose faces are grey but whose eyes are bright. They had been sitting in a ditch, waiting for someone to decide about their future, and the dog has never known a problem that cannot be solved with adoption. Somewhere to your right, someone begins to sing. It is not a hymn, though later people will insist it must have been, just a work song dragged into peacetime by mistake, the kind of tune men use to keep steps together when a load is heavier than pride. Others join, out of tune and gratitude. For a few minutes the road has a rhythm, and your body uses it to remember motion. The mountain exhales one last long sigh that travels the entire horizon. It is less sound than permission. The plume slumps, then leans, then frays into dirty weather. Birds soar too soon and angle away, offended. The sun makes a competent attempt at morning. You turn your back on the city. The way to New Syria is not smooth, but it is available. You walk it as if walking were a prayer. You do not talk about what you left, because speaking it would steal the energy you were hoarding for the next hill. The old aunt keeps pace with the calm of someone who has already negotiated with death and found it arrogant. The child asks if you will ever go home, and you say the only true thing, "We will have a home." He nods as if you have promised him a specific roof. You let him have the picture. You will work on the nouns later. Behind, the city settles. Ash slides into the empty shapes human bodies left and takes their measure like a tailor. Where voids remain, they are perfect and waiting. For plaster, for scholars, for tourists who will whisper and then speak too loudly because awe is exhausting. In the theatre of time, the props crew has already begun to lay out the scene for an audience not yet born. You will sleep in a storeroom tonight, on sacks that smell of beans and work. You will trade the last coin in your purse for bread and not feel cheated. Someone will tell you a story about a friend who turned back and survived under an archway because the stone made a pocket of breath, and you will pretend this helps you. Someone else will say the sea lifted and dropped and never apologized. A third will swear he saw a god striding through ash like a soldier late for roll call. You will accept all versions because every story is a splint. When you finally close your eyes, it will be with the image of the first surge, how it ran, punishment without footfall. The memory will visit you for years like weather. Sometimes it will keep you from sleeping. Sometimes it will let you. If you ever return, and some of you will, it will be to a city snared in stone. You will not recognize your own doorway under its new geography. You will kneel and scoop a handful of ash and let it pour through your fingers and feel, absurdly, that you are touching yesterday's breath. You will know then what you already suspect now, that the night the mountain learned to run, time itself stumbled, and the world put a bookmark in your name. Morning arrives looking used. The sky is a tarnished coin, and the road to Nuceria wears a new skin. Ashy crust that breaks with a tired sigh each time your foot insists on the future. You are a refugee now, though the word hasn't learned its letters. You are simply from there, and there has become a gesture, a grey smudge drawn in the air with two fingers. At the city gate of Nuceria, the line is already long. Fishermen who outran waves that tried to be walls. Vineyard hands dusted to the roots of their hair. A woman in a ruined wedding dress holding a shoe like a relic. An old man who carries a bronze key the size of a child, his forearm, because keys are stubborn emblems of houses that no longer exist. Above the line, a placard promises bread, water, and order in a script that believes itself. Order arrives as tablets and men with styluses. What name? Whose household? From which gate did you flee? Alive. They don't ask this one aloud, but the eye knows its duties. A clerk with ash still in his lashes scratches your family into a column of names that will later become petitions, then statistics, then a small entry in a ledger that says grain issued, oil issued, pity spent. He asks if anyone in your party can work. Any work, he adds quickly, as if the world can be mortared back together with willingness alone. He marks a symbol beside your name that means assignable. You are now a line that can be moved. The first days are weather made of people. You sleep on sacks in a granary, head to toe with strangers whose snores teach you their biographies. Every few hours, a tremor turns the building into a rumor, and the room inhales together. Children develop a professional relationship with fear. They stare it down, then outpace it with play. A boy draws the mountain on a tablet and gives it legs like a beetle. The adults laugh for longer than the joke deserves, because laughter is a kind of ration. News gusts in ragged pieces. Stabii, ash to the windowsills. Herculaneum, steam and stone. Boathouses turn to charnel vaults. Pompeii, buried, then smothered, then rewritten. Neapolis, soot on rooftops. Real estate agents already thinking of the view. 2 days in, the Roman machine wakes. Messengers crack the roads like whips. A magistrate arrives with a voice that has memorized commands and comforts in equal measure. Edicts are posted, offering tax relief for those who shelter the displaced. Contracts for clearing roads, pay for crews who will cut new channels through a landscape that has decided to be a different landscape. A small commission of men with experience in disaster, the empire has curriculum for everything, sets up at a long table under a makeshift awning, the first office of catastrophe. They need information, so you tell your story until it becomes someone else's handwriting, where you were when the column rose, how high the ash stood when you reached the gate, which street held longer, where a wall fell like a curtain, where a house trapped a family that had hoped walls were friends. The commissioners form their own map from your nouns. Lines are drawn, zones are named. Funds are assigned with the grim mercy of triage. Nothing here is sufficient, and yet everything helps. A week later, you are sent to a host house on the outskirts, to a family that had room and therefore lost the excuse not to be generous. They make space as best they can, an attic cleared of baskets, a straw mattress that decides to be plural. At dinner, the host lays an extra bowl, as if the table has always had 5 corners. Your old aunt, who has only ever blessed family, surprises herself by blessing strangers. The little boy learns the host's dog's name before he says thank you. The priorities of children are the truest physics. Work finds you because disaster loves hands. You join a gang, recruited to reopen a stretch of road toward the coast. The foreman is a man from Puteoli who speaks in useful imperatives: lift, brace, pull, drink, breathe. You learn the ash's many dialects: the powder that sifts, the crust that deceives, the clotted drifts that move like stubborn dough. Sometimes you cut through to the original stone, and everyone cheers the way soldiers cheer for water. Sometimes you cut through to nothing and call it progress anyway. At night, people trade losses like charms. My brother turned back to fetch a chest and did not return. My daughter gave birth in a barn and named the child Felix because we don't argue with irony anymore. My shop sign will outlive me. My vineyard is under winter in summer. Will we go back? Will we go back? The refrain wears many costumes. For some, going back means sifting a buried room until the spoon your mother loved recognizes your hand. For others, going back means claiming a view of a future that does not include ash in every taste. For a few, going back means never again. New names, new trades, a new lie for the question, where are you from? They answer, near the coast, and swallow the specifics. When grain ships dock in the bay, the docks become sermons. The first sacks go to bakeries, because bread can be multiplied by ovens. Women who never stood in public queues now stand in them like pillars. Men who once built amphorae now build equitable lines and fight the ancient human urge to insert their bodies into space not offered. Children carry home loaves as if they are warm animals that might leap free. Weeks pass. The empire continues to empire. Aqueducts repaired, milestones reset, tax schedules rewritten in apologetic ink. A rumor insists that the emperor wept when he heard, another that he sent his own purse to be emptied among the dispossessed, a third that he promised to rebuild every shrine to every god in every buried town, just in case offense had been mutual. No rumor feeds a child, but each one oils the hinge of dignity. You make the pilgrimage to the ridge. It is a superstition wrapped in necessity. To see is to believe. To believe is to begin. The path climbs through olives that look embarrassed to be alive. From the crest, the bay is a single dull mirror, and the city, a gentle swell as if a sleeping animal were buried on its side. Lightning no longer lives in the air, yet the silence has weather. You do not step closer. You are not ready to be the kind of person who walks on his own rooms. You bow your head instead, the old Roman gesture to invisible power, and leave before courage mistakes itself for wisdom. Survivor's math starts small and becomes doctrine. One pair of sandals lasts 2 months. 2 pairs last 4 if you rotate them and avoid wet. One tunic can be patched 3 times. After that, it is bandage or rag or swaddling. One memory told to a child becomes the child's. 2 memories told become legend and begin to edit themselves. One kindness offered obligates not return, but repetition. In the 2nd month, you join a dig-back team. Men and women who, under supervision and guarded hope, are permitted to return to the edges of Pompeii to retrieve what the city will allow. The commission issues rules. No entering whole houses, no solo heroics, no digging where the ash slumps like a throat. A line of soldiers, boys really, stands with spears that will be useless against the only enemy present. Their presence is a ritual that tells the land, we are still Rome. You lower yourself into a room you recognize by the angle of light, your peristyle, or what the ash left of it. The laurel you tended is a comma on the ground. The impluvium is a pond of dust that holds shapes of last night, the pattern of rain that never fell. You brush the ledge where the lararium stood, and your fingers come up grey and then wet, because you have learned to cry without sound. Under the drift, a cup, a bronze spoon, a bead that once rode your daughter's wrist. Every object is heavier than its weight. 2 houses over you hear a shout. not panic, something between joy and permission. A woman has found a chest that burped out under the shovel, its lid lifted by the breath of luck. Inside, a folded wool cloak, a few coins, a tablet with the stub of a stylus tucked into a crack, a small wooden box of letters tied with twine. She does not open the letters. She lifts the whole box as if it contains a sleeping creature and holds it against her ribs with gratitude that would embarrass most gods. The law will later speak through men tasked with fairness. What is recovered goes before a magistrate. Disputes are heard, heirs are determined, owners reassert themselves or accept the Empire's consolation prize, an entry on a list that will allow them to claim something somewhere else. But in these first weeks, the law is simplest at the human scale. If it is yours and the ash gives it back, take it and go before the ash changes its mind. Not everything comes back as a noun. Nightmares arrive as visitors who forget to knock. The ground is an untrustworthy friend. Any quiet becomes a prelude, any rumble a sentence with a painful verb. Children play earthquake in courtyards. One child shakes the bench while others hold bowls steady and shriek, and their parents almost forbid the game and then allow it because rehearsal is therapy by another name. Men wake at sudden noises with the look of soldiers and carry that look into daylight, where it refuses to be dismissed by wine. Some griefs calcify into myth fast enough to be useful. A mason swears he saw a woman with a lamp walk along the ridge each night. He says she is Venus searching for her lost city. An old sailor insists the sea grew hot and sang. He claims Neptune drove his horses onto land to trample the ash. A widow says her husband's voice came to her in a dream and told her where to dig. She found a jar there and inside 2 rings and a note. Sell if needed. She sold, and it fed 5 mouths for 10 days, and the dream took its place among the sanctioned stories, the ones that warm without burning. Season changes begin to touch the scar. Autumn's first good rains pin the ash in place, turn powder to parchment, teach the landscape new habits. Vines whose stakes survived put out shoots with idiot confidence. Olive trees hold their dark fruit up to a world that is relearning appetite. Markets remember how to argue about price rather than destiny. Years pass in a new tense. Some of you stay near the bay, stubborn as roots. Others drift to Capua, to Neapolis, to Rome itself, where catastrophe becomes currency in dinner conversations. A few are recruited for garrisons far away because empire pays in predictability and boots. You meet other refugees across the years, and the greeting is a touch to the forearm and the same first question: from where? The answer is never just a noun. It is always a story. Back at the buried city, nature does what nature does best. It becomes plausible. Grasses seed the drifts. Goats learn the taste of the slope. Children from nearby farms dare one another to run up to the silent ridge and shout and run back, hearts hammering with the borrowed fear of their elders. Travelers pass and point. A poet writes a few lines about the wrath of the mountain and the frailty of cities. He recites it at a patron's dinner, and the patron pats his shoulder and asks for something with more romance and less geology. Rome remembers you in the way empires remember, through funds disbursed, censuses updated, roads cleared, temples rededicated with speeches that smell of olive oil and compromise. Your personal losses remain your personal library, yet slowly they lend themselves to neighbors. The woman who took you in becomes family not by law, but by seasons shared. The boy who once slept while walking becomes an apprentice to a coppersmith and learns to beat sheets of metal into shapes that endure heat. Your old aunt dies one winter with the decorum she wore like a shawl. You bury her in a clean place, with a clean inscription that says less than it means. The dog, there is always a dog, lives long enough to teach the next puppy the route to the bakery. Decades turn. The mountain smokes, sometimes like a bad memory. Then it forgets to smoke for years, and the next generation grows proud of not fearing it. That too is a kind of wisdom, unsustainable, vital, real. Centuries later, let the page turn quickly here. Men will cut channels in the hill for water and find walls where no walls should be. They will find painted gardens whose leaves keep their green through a millennium of mistakes. They will find bread in an oven, a ring on a finger, a chain with a dog's last gesture hardened into thesis. They will pour plaster into voids because a mind looked at negative space and thought story. The plaster will set, the shapes will rise. People will come from oceans away to look at the last sentences Pompeii wrote with its body. They will weep, softly at first, then in the embarrassed register of tourists who didn't mean to bring so much self to a ruin. They will lower their voices without agreeing to it. They will read names that survived because someone once admired vowels enough to carve them hard. But that is not today. Today you stand at the edge of a new town that is trying to remember how to be old. A clerk hands you a small tablet that records your labor for the month. You have been clearing roads and carrying water and teaching a neighbor's child to shape letters that might anchor his life. The tablet says you are paid in grain and oil and the unremarkable warmth of a community intent on continuity. You tuck it into your belt with a care that would have made the old you laugh. At dusk you walk to a shrine, the kind that collects stray devotions like shells collects tide, and you leave something that is less offering than conversation. The bronze key, finally, because you understand homes can exist without doors. You say out loud, to whichever god claims this square of air, keep them. You mean the ones you lost. You mean the ones you haven't lost yet. You mean yourself, though you dress it in plural to be modest. On your way back, the evening smells of stew and wet stone and survivable futures. Someone is singing an old work song. Someone else is telling a child that the stars are back, and the child tilts his head with the obedient wonder of the young, then tries to count every light confidently and fails gloriously. For the first time since the mountain began its letter to the world, you smile without apology. Tomorrow you will petition the magistrate for a small plot, nothing grand, just enough dirt to persuade vegetables. Next month you will own a new broom and the right to be annoyed when neighbors borrow it for too long. Next year, you will teach someone how to read the word return and how to carry it carefully so it doesn't break. The city you were will never rise again in the precise grammar of its streets, but it will live where cities have always outlived themselves, in recipes and proverbs, in the angle of a hand, spreading oil in the way neighbors lean their heads together at night to trade the day. Rumor for the day as comfort. That is the long return, the one measured not in stones recovered, but in habits relearned, in jokes that don't need footnotes, in children who believe the mountain is a story about other people. And when, one day, you hear a traveler say the name Pompeii and lower his voice a little, you will not correct him. You will say the name too, quietly, as if setting a cup down on a table you still own, in a room that remembers your breath. You are in a tunnel with a candle that argues with its own flame. The year is not precise, call it the late 16th century, and you re a laborer widening a watercourse for the local lord. Your pick hits painted plaster instead of stone, red, then cobalt. Then a hand, slim as a rumor, reaching forever for a lyre that no longer makes sound. You do what laborers under lords have always done with miracles. You report upward. The engineer, a precise man named Domenico, peers in and frowns at the beauty. He marks the spot on a plan and orders the tunnel closed. The aqueduct must pass. The past will wait. For a while it does. Decades, then a century, then two. The mountain naps like an old dog. The towns on the coast trade in oil and gossip. And then curiosity returns wearing a crown. It is the 18th century, and kings have hobbies. One Bourbon monarch fancies antiquities the way other men fancy horses. He sends soldiers with shovels to a place people call Resina, to dig where rumor says theater steps bite the earth. The men tunnel like moles and find Herculaneum, not rooms, but rooms set in stone, walls still painted with gardens that bloom beneath the lamp. Everything smells of damp and deep time. They break statues free as if pulling teeth, and the statues obey because marble is in no position to object. The crates go to Naples, to a palace that becomes a museum, where courtiers applaud each bust as if Caesar himself were taking another bow. Treasure is a fast teacher and a bad one. Soon, picks move inland to another buried swell. Tunnels again. Corridors with wax-smeared walls. Candles coughing black onto frescoes that wear soot like shame. Then, a word spoken softly at first and then louder. Pompeii. The letters fit like a key in a lock. The men work faster now. They chase corridors and nick paint and pry mosaic tesserae loose to make pretty tables for important dining rooms. They leave pits like punctuation. Question marks, mostly. Not everyone digs like a robber, some take notes. One engineer, careful where others are greedy, sketches rooms with a surgeon's attention. He records not just statues, but contexts. Which amphorae stood by which door, which wall carried which scene. He is mocked as fussy in a century that prefers trophies to information. He dies with his notebooks bound, but not canonized. Later, scholars will read them the way climbers read maps. In time, the tunnels give way to daylight operations. Trenches open like eyelids. Streets re-emerge with their ruts intact, and the first photographs, later, will catch visitors walking them in ridiculous hats, astonished and faintly disrespectful. This is the first theatre of memory, the city as spectacle, the past as entertainment. Guides carry long sticks to point at cubicular and lararia and at the most explicit frescoes, which they reveal and conceal with a showman's flourish. Even then, people lower their voices without deciding to. It is the instinct that ruins require. And then, in the 1860s, a man arrives who cares more for sentences than for shiny nouns. His name is Giuseppe, and he believes a buried city should be treated like a document, not a quarry. He introduces an address system, regions and blocks, that sounds dull until you realize dullness is a form of rescue. He writes labels, he keeps lists, he trains guards, he orders roofs. He is not glamorous. He is indispensable. One day, exploring a garden where ash has preserved voids in the shape of roots, this man notices a different kind of hollow, human-sized, irregular, an absence with posture. He has an idea both simple and blasphemous. He mixes plaster and pours it into the emptiness. When it hardens, workers chip the ash away and a shape emerges. A person, curled, mouth open to a last breath that still hasn't finished. The face is not a face. It is a topography of pause and pain. The body is not a body. It is a negative, a mold of a moment. People stand around the cast and forget to perform their century. Some cross themselves, others bend without knowing why. The man who poured the plaster stares like he has caught a soul in his hands and is sorry for it. He repeats the experiment, cautiously at first, then more. Children, a woman with her jewelry still on, a man clutching a bundle that was probably a child before it became a bundle. Their postures write a grammar of last things: reach, protect, hide, hope, pray. Arguments begin and have not stopped. Are these resurrections or intrusions? Are we honoring the dead by giving them back their outlines or violating an agreement ash made with grief? The answer, of course, is yes, both. All memory worth keeping is a trespass with purpose. Excavation grows teeth and rules. The city is parceled into regiones and insulae. Houses acquire tidy names. The faun, the veti, the tragic poet, labels halfway between poetry and inventory. Teams peel layers carefully, and then, sometimes, not carefully enough. Exposure is a second kind of burial. Rain and sun are less romantic on plastered walls than they were on ash. Scholars learn this truth by watching paint fade like a sigh. Meanwhile, Naples becomes the antechamber to Pompeii's memory. A museum fills with treasures that travel no more, bronze dancers whose toes remember music, mosaics that encode entire oceans in glass, silver cups that carry the weight of mouths that are dust now. In cases, carbonized loaves rest divided into 8 wedges, bakeries stamped as if the baker feared forgery in eternity. The value of the display is not price, it is closeness. Visitors press against glass to be near a dog's collar that once corrected a dog. The 20th century arrives, bringing both attention and harm. Roads and rail deliver crowds. Enthusiasm sometimes outruns conservation, and the city is peeled wide so visitors can gasp at whole neighborhoods. A director with a builder's soul uncovers long streets and frames them photogenically. Applause. Then war comes, and with it bombs that do not care for frescoes or for Latin. Buildings crack. Plaster powders. Afterward, the men with trowels return with a new humility. They mix mortar like prayers. Archaeology grows up. Stratigraphy becomes scripture. A room is not a room. It is 14 layers of decision. A hearth tells you what people ate. A drain tells you where they failed to. Pollen locked in stucco records summer's temper. Seeds in cesspits confess winter. In one kitchen, scientists tease a smear from a pot and learn it was fish stew with herbs. In another, they find a fig so carbonized it has become a miniature solar system. Lab coats replace some togas. Microscopes join measuring tapes. The city's story shrinks and deepens at once. The plaster casts, those white mute witnesses, multiply and then begin to crack. People propose resins, foams, CT scans. Some are stabilized. Some return to ash in slow motion, a second death you can measure in hairline fractures. All the while, ethics keep pace. Should we make new casts at all? Should we leave voids as voids, a negative sermon about absence? Scholars debate. The mountain is indifferent. Then the 21st century arrives with drones, lasers and grants with acronyms. Cracks in walls become datasets. A collapse in a much photographed building shames governments into funding. Teams wearing high-vis vests over dusty hearts wash the frescoes not with water but with light. Lasers gentle as moths skim soot molecule by molecule from a painted peacock-head's throat. A conservator cries silently the first time she sees colors that last saw sun under the Flavians. New rooms open as if the city, reassured by competence, consents to yield. A courtyard appears with a painted lararium wrapped in snakes and stars. At its base, a tiny garden replanted by archaeologists grows rosemary and rue that smell like thyme. A snack bar emerges with its counter still bright, jars still smelling faintly of chickpeas and mulled wine. The painted menu, Dux, a dog who believes he owns the shop, has edges so sharp you could cut yourself on a beak. In a storeroom, a mirror, tarnished, yes, finds a modern face and repeats its oldest trick. Elsewhere on the city's edge, a villa yields a chariot so ornate it seems designed to carry a god, and then to carry gossip about the god S-lover. It is red and black and silver, its iron skeleton holds bronze skin, its wheels are poetry in circles. Nearby, a small room of the enslaved preserves the most modest furniture, a bed of boards with a rope lattice, a chest, a jar, a child's imprint in the dust. The contrast is a thesis no inscription needs to write. A garden wall offers up a square of bread fallen flat, topped with poppy seeds and herbs. Headlines call it a pizza because headlines must eat too. Scholars smile and shake their heads and say gently, "No tomatoes." The public shrugs and says gently, "We know." The point is not accuracy, it is an affectionate reach across time. At the same time, the city's infrastructure becomes the main character. The drains, the fountains, the lead pipes that once braided water through blocks like veins. Engineers in neon helmets crawl where cats walk, mapping gradients and clogs. They reopen channels and, this detail thrills me, reinstall roofs over houses that have been roofless longer than most civilizations have lasted. Because a roof is not romance. It is the only spell we know that defeats weather. Theatre returns not as gladiators, but as visitors who perform wonder. A school group sits cross-legged in a peristyle while a guide paints history in sentences. A woman in running shoes cries at a plaster figure and then laughs at herself crying and then cries harder because self-awareness fixes nothing. A man proposes marriage under a fresco of Ariadne, which is either ironic or perfect, depending on your tolerance for mythic men. A cat with one tattered ear claims the House of the Faun as his jurisdiction and fails to be impressed by the Alexander mosaic. He prefers sun. Archaeologists, the new kind, who speak both Latin and LiDAR, argue among themselves with a generosity born of shared obsession. One says, publish slower, conserve faster. Another says, excavate less, maintain more. A third says the city is large enough to last all our lifetimes if we treat it like a library, not a buffet. They are all correct. They drink bad coffee from small cups and write grant proposals with verbs that beg. Between trenches, you will see a conservator sit very still with a brush the size of a breath, coaxing a flake of paint back into the wall's allegiance. That is one version of heroism. In a lab, a young researcher runs a scan on a cast and discovers a belt buckle embedded where a waist once was. She prints an image and pins it above her desk as if it were a saint. In the storeroom, a registrar updates a record to replace anonymous child with boy, 6-8 years, wooden toy near right hand, because precision is compassion's favorite tool. Outside the gates, the modern town carries its own sorrows and commerce. Vendors sell postcards that fade in the sun. A cafe insists its cappuccino is the best in Campania and is wrong but charming. Residents commute past a ruin that funds them and bores them. Children on bikes pop wheelies along the old wall and call the guards by their first names. To live next to a miracle is to occasionally prefer lunch. And you, finally here with your ticket scanned, walk a street whose stones carry 2,000 years of footsteps like a rumor that refuses to die. The ruts look like the trajectory of insistence. You pause at a stepping stone crosswalk and fit your foot into the Roman shoe your imagination casts. A Baker AS oven holds a darkness that might still smell of flour if your mind were willing. In the house of the Vetii, two cupids paint wine with wine. In the house of the poet, the beware of the dog mosaic glitters with its permanent joke. In a modest room, a sketch of a ship floats on a wall, as if a child had drawn an escape plan and then grown up before the sea arrived. You stand before a cast and practice the only honest posture here, attention without entitlement. The figure's mouth is open, the body's curve expresses both recoil and reach. You think of the man who poured the plaster, of the tunnelers before him, of kings with hollow pockets and scholars with full notebooks and tourists with ungovernable eyes. You think of the people who lived here and did the thing we are designed to do. Repeat, work, eat, love, sleep, argue, hope. And then you do it. You repeat their gesture, placing 2 fingers on the threshold and touching those fingers to your lips, not because you believe in those gods, but because you believe in theirs. Memory is theft with a return policy. We take from the past to pay the present. And then, if we are decent, we give it back with interest. Roofs, labels, context, care. The theatre of memory only becomes sacred when we keep the backstage in better shape than the set. As you leave, the late light limbs the city's edges and the mountain plays at innocence. In the museum in Naples, the bronze dancers will dance whether you look or not. In a lab behind the scenes, a cast will learn, through scanning, that the person inside once had a spinal condition or a healed fracture or a ring that says more than any caption could. On site, a conservator will lock the door to a newly cleaned room and exhale like a person who has just tucked a child in. You step through the gate and back into your century. In your pocket, a ticket stub, a small stone you didn't mean to steal and will put in a potted plant at home, a phrase you didn't expect to keep. The city is a sentence still being written. History doesn't speak in complete sentences. It mutters in pigments, exhales in dust, leaves fingerprints on a wine cup, a nail hole, a smear of sauce burned to the bottom of a pot. If the earlier chapters felt like a camera moving through a living city, this one is the lens, the way we bring a buried day into focus and keep it from blurring back into myth. Let's start with the loudest voices, the letters. A teenager across the bay, Pliny, watched the mountain turn into a pine of fire and did a thing that saved civilizations, he wrote. Decades later, he described the plume, the ash, the sea pulling strange, the panic that looked like piety. His sentences are the scaffolding for our timeline. Everything else either climbs them or contradicts them. But even Pliny is a camera with an angle. He stood in Misenum, not Pompeii. He saw far, not near. He gives us the shape of the disaster, not its temperature. Archaeology supplies the degrees. Ash is a diary. The city lies inside layered blankets of fallout, like a book pressed under a riverbed. Each layer has a character. The earliest fine and sifted, choking rooms into silence. Later beds coarser, light pumice that falls like benign hail until it doesn't. Finally, dense surges and flows that move fast and hot, writing with heat, not weight. You can read the day by slicing the deposits as you would a cake and counting subtle shifts. A spike in grain size, a change in color from dove to gunmetal, a crust where rain hit ash and made armor. Under one roof, pumice is knee-high, evidence they lasted hours into the fall. Under another, just a finger's breadth before the surge sealed everything with a single, merciless sentence. Rooms gossip. A kitchen where the pots still sit nested, soot fresh, tells you someone fled quickly. A bakery where a door was barred from the inside and loaves were still in the oven tells you flight turned to waiting, waiting to a hope at the threshold. Carbonized bread, scored into 8 slices, stamped with the baker's mark, becomes a timestamp you can smell. In the courtyard, a cistern filled halfway with ash and then stopped by a crust means someone drew water after the first fall, and before the surge. Every float line a minute hand. Bones are biographies. In Herculaneum's boathouses, skeletons cluster as if fear were geometry. You can read age, sex, diet, labor from them. Enamel hypoplasia in teeth tells of childhood stress. Healed fractures tell of previous arguments with gravity. Robust muscle attachments whisper what tools a life lifted. Strontium and oxygen isotopes in enamel tell us where a person spent their early years. Foreign-born, local-born, coastal, upland. A woman with a heavy gold bracelet didn't outrun a surge. A dock worker with a spine like a ship's keel didn't either. Death is democratic. Labor leaves angles. Graffiti is the city's inside voice. Secundus loves Iris. Vote for Aulus, a decent man. A price list for wine by the cup. A tracked tab. A doodled ship. Elections, arguments, lust notes, menu specials, scratched and painted in quick hands. These are not marble inscriptions composed for gods and emperors. They're the real record, reckless and honest. If you want to know how Romans swore, flirted, hustled and joked, look to the walls. If you want to know where they lived, follow the addresses, the modern digger signs. Reggio 6, Insula 15, Door 3. Boring saves civilizations. Paint remembers light. Frescoes were painted onto wet plaster. One fresco, so pigment fused with lime as it cured. When excavators cut away the ash, colors that last saw sunlight under the Flavian emperors blink awake. Pompeian red that isn't a truly red, but hematite singing. Egyptian blue made in kilns with a recipe more alchemy than craft. Malachite greens that learned patience. Conservation in the 21st century behaves like medicine, not magic. Lasers skim soot molecule by molecule. Consolidants wick into flaking pigment to re-wet old marriages between plaster and paint. Even so, exposure is a second burial. That's why modern work often installs roofs, less photogenic than a full street open to the sky, but kinder. Pipes confess. Lead lines ribboned water through fountains and houses. Their network is a map of thirst and wealth. Lead is poisonous, yes, but the flow and carbonate layers suggest chronic exposure more than instant doom. Meanwhile, drains, stone throats, tell you about rainfall, markets, meat and mess. Seeds, fish bones, eggshells and olive pits sluiced into cesspits are the city's compost heap of truths. Under a latrine seat, archaeobotanists pull out coriander, dill, pepper, spices that sailed, and local staples, einkorn, barley, fava. A smear scraped from a pot is run through a mass spec, and whispers, fish stew with lovage, a hint of wine, and someone got generous with the garum. The calendar wobbles. Was it August 24th, as some manuscripts of Pliny say? Or October, as autumnal finds suggest? Charred pomegranates and walnuts, a braziers lit, a coin minted late in the year, all argue for later. Scholars wrangle politely and sometimes not. The answer may be both. A scribal slip in a long chain of copying plus an autumnal market. What matters for us is precision married to humility, confident enough to date, cautious enough to footnote. Plaster is empathy cast. In the 1860s, voids in the ash were recognized as spaces where bodies once lay, organic matter long gone. Liquid plaster poured in and set, and the city returned people in poses of protection and prayer. Today we scan casts to find buckles, rings, even fabrics imprinted, then debate, make more, leave voids as voids, switch to resins. When a conservator cradles a cracking cast and consolidates it with a brush the size of a breath, that's an ethical act, not just a technical one. We owe the dead context. We owe them care. We owe them privacy we cannot entirely give. LIDAR and drones map what patience can't. Laser pulses trace roof lines, walls, and voids under vegetation. Photogrammetry stitches thousands of overlapping images into 3D models you can tour from a laptop at 2 a.m. with a bowl of cereal. That model isn't a toy, it's a planning tool. Where are stress cracks? Where will the next wall fail? Which gutter is a culprit? Conservation is logistics disguised as love. Workrooms echo hands. A full of knickers vats, dye and ammonia, hold the very salts of human labor. You can stand in that room and hear stomping like a song, knees, curses, gossip. A blacksmith's forge, slag, quenched nails, hammers with handles replaced 3 times, argues that repair was constant. New was an extravagance. A tavern's counter, painted ducks, a coiled dog, tells you the house specialty and the house attitude in a single line. Next to it, amphorae stamped with names, vineyards that lay under ash 5 minutes after someone signed for delivery. Names persist where we let them. Houses wear labels, house of the veti of the faun, because donors and curators live by poetry as much as by parcel numbers, but real names come from seals, rings, signatures. A wine shop with graffiti naming Umbricius feels different when you meet Umbricius, the fish sauce magnate, in Naples on stamped amphorae. Suddenly, supply chains cross from ruin to museum, from shore to shelf. Surge science reconstructs the night. The flows that killed didn't merely cover, they cooked. Ash layers fuse into a sinter where heat lingered. Wood char depth is a thermometer. Roof tiles exploded by thermal shock are a stopwatch. You can model wind direction, topography, and likely paths of the ground-hugging clouds that threaded alleys like intelligent fog. The map that emerges is equal parts physics and heartbreak. Here, survivable, here, not. Ethics matured. Early digs prized sculpture over story. Later decades learned that a room's sweepings say more than its statues. In the 20th century, the site was opened wide. Grandeur, tour buses, postcards, then suffered weather and neglect. The 21st brought a corrective. Excavate less, conserve more. Stabilize, roof, drain, catalogue, publish, repeat. The most heroic act in Pompeii today might be a well-placed gutter. Misconceptions are durable. No, everyone wasn't frozen mid-feast under a single instant of doom. Many fled, many waited, many died hours apart in different ways. No. Beware of the dog isn't proof Romans feared their pets. It's a joke, a boast, a threshold charm. No, the city was not decadence incarnate. It was work incarnate with moments of leisure and lust. And no, the casts are not wax figures. They are voids turned visible, silhouettes of absence filled so we may pay attention. Why it matters. Pompeii is not a time machine, it's a mirror. It tells us cities are agreements as much as stones, that infrastructure is theology in pipes and gutters, that neighbors are destiny, that paperwork outlives heroics, that a grocery list on a wall might be the most honest poem of a century. It reminds us that disasters don't just end lives, they edit them, compressing decisions until character shows. When you walk a basalt street and set your foot into a rut worn by wheels 2 millennia old, you participate in the city's last, best trick, continuity. You are not the first to stand at a lararium and touch 2 fingers to your lips without believing in those gods. You won't be the last to cry, then laugh at crying, then cry harder because awe is exhausting. The work of digging, conserving, reading, arguing keeps the theater of memory open for the next audience. You think a volcano saves nothing. You think it only erases. But ash is not just an ending. It is a peculiar kind of archive, brutal, indiscriminate, and, when we are patient, astonishingly generous. This epilogue isn't another escape through alleys or a roll call of ruins. It's a ledger of what survived and why it matters, the balance sheet of a city that lost its breath and, in losing it, taught us to listen. 1. The smallest words, handwriting, lists, and unapologetic graffiti. Fire will happily eat papyrus. Ash, however, will sometimes bake ink to the page like a crust. And walls, those gossiping sunburned diaries, sheltered a different alphabet, graffiti. A city's inside voice scratched across stucco gives us names the marble never bothered to learn. Secundus, Iris, Helvius, Sabina. One hand writes, "I was here." Another answers, "Me too and with her." Election slogans bloom next to price lists for wine. A kid, bored in Latin class, doodles a ship with a sail too big to behave. What the ash saved here isn't just the content, it's the permission, the right of ordinary people to be legible to the future. In textbooks, empires are made of laws, wars, and emperors. In Pompeii, an empire is also made of a teenager carving "I can write" into a wall and then proving it. 2. Bread, bones, and the kitchen clock. Archaeology is timekeeping with flour and fire. A loaf stamped for sale, cut into 8, carbonized mid-rise. There's your timestamp between Ashfall and Surge. A pan with fish stew burned into a black signature. A jar still fragrant, if your imagination cooperates, with wine and herbs. Eggshells, olive pits, coriander seeds, pepper that sailed. Each item is a minute hand. Bones fill in the hours. Enamel stripes recording childhood famines. Healed fractures that testify to accidents survived. A dockworker's spine that remembers ropes and crates. What the ash saved is not a menu. It's a rhythm. The metronome of a day when breakfast was bread. And oil, lunch a bowl at the thermopolium. Dinner a negotiation with appetite and fortune. Food is a city's most honest calendar. 3. The architecture of ordinary people come for mosaics and leave haunted by rooms. A threshold polished by sandals until the stone shines like a river. A latch worn smooth by 1,000 cautious hands. A lararium niche smudged by 2 fingers to lips, 2 lips to hope, repeated until pigment learned liturgy. Ash saved the angles of habit, where a table always stood because sunlight liked that corner. How high a shelf sat because the owner was short, the very path a cat preferred, evidenced by claw marks on a sill. Cities are less their grand avenues than their navigated inches. Pompeii gives us inches. 4. Infrastructure as theology. Water in Pompeii was belief made visible. Fountains at corners, lead pipes ribboning wealth, drains swallowing the city's decisions. Under ash, the system waited like a skeleton for someone to name it again. Rereading it, we remember that civilization is not a statue. It's pressure, gradient, gutter, and grit. When modern teams reinstall roofs and reopen channels, they're not prettifying the past. They're keeping a promise. That memory deserves plumbing. 5. The shapes of last things. The casts are not bodies. They're negatives turned legible. A woman collapsed in a reach that never finished. A man curled around a bundle that was likely a child. A dog arched mid-struggle against a chain. They're hard to look at because they look back, not with eyes, but with posture. Each one is a grammar of the final verb: protect, pray, refuse, yield. Ash saved their outlines, and we argue, properly, about the ethics of pouring plaster into absence. But the casts forced a change in how we talk about the past. They prevented abstraction. You cannot say casualties with a straight face after you've met a person who still holds their last breath. And 6, silence, properly labeled. Early diggers dragged objects out like trophies and left the city louder but less wise. Later generations learned to label context. Rooms as coordinates, deposits as layers, finds as sentences with subjects and verbs. The ash saved silence, and then conservation taught us to read it. An empty shelf prints a rectangle of clean wall amid soot, a negative photograph of where jars once lived. A clean strip beneath a couch's legs. Ash didn't settle there, says the couch existed, was moved, vanished, and the room changed tense. When we publish slowly, measure carefully, and roof generously, we add footnotes to silence. Footnotes are what make a library usable. 7, misconceptions and how to outlive them. The ash preserved a myth we had to correct, that disaster is instantaneous, that everyone died in a single cinematic gulp. The layers disagree. Some fled early, some waited, some lived through Ashfall only to meet the surge by morning. The city did not freeze mid-feast. It endured in chapters. That is almost crueler and more human. The ash also preserved our appetite for scandal. Pompeii's erotic frescoes are real, yes, and also the least interesting thing about a city that functions. The past is not titillation, it is logistics plus longing. The ash saved both and asked us to rank them properly. 8. The work itself. Stand behind the scenes, and you'll see what ash saves best. Craft. A conservator with a brush the size of a breath, persuading flaking pigment to remain married to plaster. A surveyor translating walls into coordinates so future workers don't inherit confusion. A registrar changing anonymous child to boy, 8 years, wooden toy near right hand, because accuracy is compassion's favorite tool. Ash made a promise. People keep it. The hero shot isn't a tourist in a sunbeam, it's a gutter installed on a Tuesday. 9. The lessons that refuse to age. Pompeii's survival manual is portable. Redundancy. Multiple fountains, many wells, distributed bakeries. When one corner failed, another corner fed. Local knowledge, graffiti doubles as bulletin board and rumor engine. News moves faster when everyone is a scribe. Maintenance. A city is a machine that turns neglect into catastrophe. Roofs first, drains second, everything else negotiable. Humility. Engineers can be wrong, gods can be silent. Mountains do not take meetings. Build like you know that. Kindness as policy. In the Ashfall chapters, strangers lifted beams together. In the aftermath, host families made room without paperwork. Empires survive because neighbors do. 10. What the ash didn't save, and that's part of the story, music evaporated. Laughter, unless you count the curve of a cupid's lip. The precise blue of a sunset over the bay we keep inventing and likely never match. Names, most of them. We reconstruct some from seals, rings, account tablets. The rest are nouns without vowels, lives reduced to shape and proximity. It hurts, and should. The ache is ethical. It keeps us from confusing reconstruction with resurrection. 11. The long return. Thousands of years wrapped Pompeii like additional ash. Monks copying Pliny's letters, engineers tunneling for water and bumping into painted gods, kings funding digs that looked like plunder, a humble brainwave about pouring plaster into absence, generations of course corrections until modern teams finally said, excavate less, conserve more, roof first. The long return is not tourists on a sunny street, it's continuity. The way a city that died learned to shelter the living with scholarships, jobs, techniques and stories. The boy who cried at a cast grows into a conservator who stabilizes another. A Naples school kid rides the Circumvesuviana on a field trip and later writes the grant that saves a wall. Continuity is rescue disguised as routine. 12. The ritual of leaving. Every visitor invents a rite. Some tuck a pebble into a pocket and later plant it in a houseplant, as if rooting memory were that simple. Some touch a threshold, 2 fingers, lips, borrowing a gesture from a household that no longer pays rent. Some whisper, veil, to an empty room. The correct ritual is the one that leaves you quieter and more responsible than you arrived. Before you go, stop at any corner fountain. Run a palm along the lip where thousands of mouths taught stone to be smooth. Hear how water, when the pipes behave, makes a sound like a city breathing. That noise is the thesis. We came here for the dead and learned how to keep the living. Final mise en place, what the ash saved, a short inventory. A loaf mid-bake, the clock that doesn't lie. A dog's chain drawn tight, loyalty's geometry. A child's doodled ship, hope in crude lines. A garden painted on a wall, humans insisting on summer indoors. A drain full of seeds, the pantry speaking Latin. A lead pipe, ambition with consequences. A mirror tarnished, the past's favorite trick. A cast with a ring imprint, love reduced to circumference. A gutter, newly installed, the present paying its debt. If all this sounds like reverence, it is. Not the kind that makes altars to ash, but the kind that keeps roofs on rooms, labels on shelves, and stories honest enough to instruct. We'll close the gate now. Walk back into your lit apartment, the quiet hum of your fridge, clean water on demand, a roof that does not negotiate. This is the inheritance the ash made easier to love. Say thank you out loud if the room can bear it, to the people who built your drains, patched your ceiling, paved your road. And if you pass a neighbor on the stairs, practice the oldest urban technology. Be kind first. That, more than any statue, is what lets a city outlive itself. Tomorrow night we open a fresh file, new place, new calamity, new lessons that travel. If you've got a preference, say it in the comments with your time and your map pin. I'll be here at midnight, as promised. Bring your curiosity. I'll bring the light.